What's up, everybody? It's me, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new mid-season patch DPS tier list where I talk about all the best and worst DPS to play this patch, and we are going to be breaking down how they fit into the meta. But if you enjoy the content, do me a solid and smash the like, subscribe, and let me know down below what hero do you want to see buffed or nerfed next. Let me know why, and let's get started. Now, the first hero that we got to talk about is Cassidy, and Cassidy has kind of just been through the ringer, or rather been putting everyone else through the ringer with his crazy abilities that just keep getting tweaked and changed. And while he didn't get any changes here, I think that Cassidy has kind of cemented himself as a really solid ranked choice. While not necessarily the best for coordinated play, because he does have weaknesses against multiple divers, I do think that Cassidy is just really strong at denying certain tanks on the roster. There's a couple of tanks that just really don't get to play around him very easily, namely Doom and Hammond. And I think he's just a very consistent character that can both handle flyers, handle flankers, and all in all, I'm going to put him low A tier. I think he's really solid. Maybe not necessarily as good in the higher ranks of play. I think there's some other DPS that can kind of punish him and outshine him a little bit, but for the majority of the ranks of play, I think he's a solid A tier pick. Next up, we do got to talk about Torb, where Torb just got some rather big changes around his turret. His primary fire is going to be better. He's going to actually be able to get more uptime with his overall damage output, but overall with his turret, it's going to be lower, and it's not going to be as consistent, and it's going to be easier for people to deal with a turret. And I do think that for most ranks, this is going to be a flat nerf to Torb, and we've already seen that. Although in the higher ranks, some of the Torb mains and people that play Torb a lot are getting more value. But you got to understand that that value that you got out of turret was really the reason that you played this character a lot of the time. The consistency, the ability to deny flyers like Echo and characters like Tracer. So overall, it's going to feel like a nerf to the character for most ranks, and I do think that he's still solid, but not as strong as he used to be. He's going to be a B tier character. He's fine. There's nothing really wrong with him, but I do think there's a lot of other characters that are more competitive options than him, and there's characters that do similar things to him, and they do it a little bit better. Now, let's talk about Widowmaker. Widowmaker's in a rough state. It's in a really rough state. There's a lot of characters that can threaten her. She doesn't really threaten the same way that she used to. Yes, if you're really great with Widowmaker, you could still make her work. And I do think that on some maps, if you're an aggressive Widowmaker, you can pull her off. But right now, one, there's a lot of dive options that are really good. Two, some of the other options that people play threaten Widow a lot. Characters like Sombra, Tracer, characters like Hanzo. These characters really threaten Widowmaker. And I think the only real saving grace for Widowmaker right now is that, like, Hammond isn't seeing a ton of play, but that's, like, not really that much of a saving grace. I do think that this character is pretty weak. She probably needs reworks. She's not going to be great for the majority of ranks. I think that if you are a Grandmaster plus Widowmaker, maybe she's like a C or low B. But for the vast majority of players, I'm putting her in the D tier. I think she's a D tier character. There's just better, more competitive options for how much you're going to have to do on this character. I'm going to put her in the D tier. Next up, let's talk about Sombra. I do think that Sombra is actually really good. We are seeing a lot of dive Sombra around Sombra Tracer. She's really disruptive. She gets to build EMP, which is one of the best DPS ults, period. And I do think that overall, this character is just really strong, really disruptive, can really put out a lot of pressure and bait out really powerful bits of utility, like things like Nade and Suzu, and the list goes on and on. I think she's really good. She fits into the meta. I would say that she's similar in power level to Cassidy right now, but just on a different axis. I'm going to put her probably a little bit lower, but they're about the same in power level. I think they're just played in much different compositions. They both have their own strengths and weaknesses, and I do think that there's other characters that could fill this role a bit better, or that you would rather pick first over these characters if you're playing most optimal compositions, but that doesn't mean these characters are bad. I just think that they might not be like the creme de la creme of what you could possibly pick. Let's talk about Ashe, where Ashe just kind of cemented herself as one of the best DPS in the game. She's very reliable. She's incredibly consistent with how much damage she's putting out. I understand that there's the reload factor, but outside of that small amount of downtime where you're typically going to reposition, you're putting out a lot of damage, a lot of reliable damage with your dynamite. Your ultimate, I would say it's a top 3 DPS ultimate, which is really saying something. And she's also very good at keeping certain characters in check. She can outrange Cassidy, so that's good. She can one-shot Tracer, which is very good. Burst a lot of characters, poke down a lot of tanks from distance. You can take vertical high ground. and then she plays with the pocket really well. So like with ranked play, you're going to run into a lot more mercies than normal, so you're going to be able to utilize pockets better than just about any other DPS, maybe outside of like Pharah and Sojourn, debatably. But yeah, I'm going to put her... I think I'm actually going to put her in the low S tier. I think you could put her in the high A. I did put her in the high A before. I do think I'm actually going to put her in low S. I think she's actually that good. For ranked play, on average, I think that she is that strong. Let's talk about Tracer right now. And yeah, I keep putting Tracer in the top of S tier. It's just because there's nothing like her. She's just irreplaceable. This is the character that you like almost always want on your team before other divers. While I do think that you could definitely build a composition around some other divers like Genji and some other divers like Sombra, you're not going to want to play those divers before you want to play Tracer. You're going to want to play Tracer first. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get every bit of value out of Tracer. Tracer has a really high skill ceiling, a really high skill floor. She's hard to learn. And I did make a previous video about how if you don't have the skill set on Tracer to utilize all these tools that she has, she's not going to be an S tier character for you. She's going to be, you know, maybe a mid B or maybe an A tier. But she is a character that when played to her highest potential, or close to her highest potential, or maybe not even close, but, you know, to a relatively high potential, she gets a lot of value. She does. And she's just irreplaceable in how much she does on a team. Her actions per minute, her APM, the amount that you can get done on this character, the amount you can hard carry on this character, is really unlike any other character. She definitely deserves an S tier spot, and I'm putting her right up there at the very top. She's probably far and away the best DPS, maybe the best character in the game right now. Let's talk about Junkrat. Junkrat is just, he's in a kind of a rough state. There's a lot of flyers, there's a lot of echoes, there's a lot of Pharahs, there's characters that outrange Junkrat. I do think that you can get value on Junkrat in the lower tiers of play. Of course, he gets quite a bit of value just because players don't route very deliberately. Like, the slower you're moving through open space, the more and more value a Junkrat's gonna get. And on top of that, if you really know the character, like you master the character and knows all these spam spots and things like that, you can get a crazy amount of value on it. I've seen a lot of Grandmaster Junkrats just pop the hell off on this character. That's going to require a ton of expertise, and it's not really traditional for what the character is going to be doing in a meta. I think all in all, the character is relatively weak, but there are some maps on defense that I think the character is legitimately strong. He's a very map-centric character, where some maps he's going to be like the worst character in the game, and on some maps he's going to be closer to like low A, like mid B. Overall, I'm going to put him in the C tier. I think that he could probably get a buff in some way, but I think he's a C tier character right now. We'll talk more about that in the buffs and nerfs list later on in a couple of weeks. Let's go and move on to Mei. Mei's really great. I do know that with a lot of the changes to Mei is actually effectively a tad weaker than she was before. She's fine. I don't think that it really affected what is really important on the character, which is her wall, which is her ice block, which is her blizzard. And yeah, Mei's just a really strong character. I think she's probably one of the easiest ways for people that are either one, off rolling and coming to DPS to succeed, because she's very game sense oriented, and two, I think she's honestly one of the best characters to climb to Grandmaster and beyond in the easiest way possible. That doesn't mean that Mei is necessarily easy, but I think that you just bring so much automatic value. Like, just having good walls, just a baseline of impact is so high, because unlike many of the other characters in the DPS slot, you actually force the enemy tank to completely play around you, which many of these other DPS, like, tanks are going to ignore the hell out of you. They don't care what you're doing at all. In fact, they want you to focus them. It's not true for Mei. I think Mei's really good. I'm actually going to put Mei about where I put Cassidy and Sombra. I think these three are also like kind of in that little tier where they're all very good and very competitive, but maybe not the best things to be doing when everyone's playing most optimally. Let's talk about Sojourn. And I think that, especially with the Sojourn buff, Sojourn is a very competitive option. She's been a competitive option for a while. I put her right next to Ashe before, right neck and neck with Ashe, at the top of the A tier in previous metas. And I do think with these buffs, I think while Ashe has kind of showcased herself to be a bit stronger in, you know, recent meta tournaments and just recent pick rate, I do think that with this recent Sojourn buff, Sojourn kind of is keeping up with that. And I think that she's just a really versatile DPS. I talked about this before. One of the reasons why I put Tracer so highly up and some of the other characters highly up on some of my other tier lists is how many compositions can they play in? How versatile of a pick that are they? Like, can they only be played with dive? Can they only be played with poke? Can they only be played with brawl? And we put Kiriko at the top of the S tier, even though all the supports were strong, because Kiriko is a very flexible support that can be played with any composition. Same thing with Sojourn. There is not a bad composition with Sojourn. You could play her in poke, dive, brawl. It doesn't matter. She works in all of them. And that really makes her super, super strong. And I think the only thing really holding her back is you need consistent railgun shots. And that's why really her value kind of doesn't scale up linearly. Like, you are going to get more value at most skill levels with characters like Cass and Ashe. But at the highest tiers of play, I think that Sojourn becomes one of the best DPS, a lot more competitive. I'm still going to put her in the S tier. I think she's sitting there right up neck and neck with some of these characters. She definitely deserves a really high place. Next up, let's talk about Reaper. Reaper's actually, he's doing all right. There's some things about Reaper that are working really well right now. I still think he needs a buff, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but there are some characters in particular that Reaper can actually threaten in really meaningful ways, namely Winston and Ramatra. Those are the two. I don't know why Ramatra's not down here, but yeah, Ramatra is a character that can't really beat Reaper very easily in a 1v1, if at all. And I do think that Reaper is a character that can actually keep that tank in check. You also can kind of semi-ignore a lot of characters on the roster. Your most annoying one would probably be maybe Sigma and Diva, but with a little bit, maybe Arista will see a bit more play. I think that Reaper is like okay. I think he's a good flex pick, not someone that you would want to play all the time, but under the right circumstances, you could whip him out. I think he's okay. So I'm actually going to put him at the bottom of B. I could maybe justify the top of C because he's not going to be played nearly as much, but I think because Ramatra is like one of the best tanks in the game and he has a good Ramatra matchup, I'm gonna put him in the bottom of the B. I'm gonna give him a little bit there. So yeah. Next up, let's talk about Soldier 76. The Soldier 76 buffs are insane. We all have seen what they are. This character is ridiculous. This character is gonna get nerfed. Right now, I think that maybe at the highest tiers of play, I think you could still probably justify these three characters more. Even though Soldier is really, really strong, I think you could probably justify these three characters more. Mainly because of these two, the burst damage is kind of just super important in a lot of these fights where positioning is key. And then with Tracer, I think it's really just about how active you are overall. I mean, you can't really replicate what Tracer can do. On some maps, I think Soldier is going to be a bit better, but for every rank, if we combine the value that a Soldier will bring across the ranks, I think Soldier is just like the DPS to one trick right now. Like, if you're looking for a DPS, you don't know what to play, just lock Soldier. Just lock Soldier, focus on the high ground, focus on your positioning, focus on off-angling. Really think about how you can control enemy DPS. Like, if a Ashe is on an off angle, or a Sojourn's on an off angle, or Hanzo's on an off angle, you want to get those people off the off angles. You want to control the off angles, and you could do it alone, where if you do a little bit of damage to a Hanzo that's by himself, he has to dip, but if he hits you once, you can heal yourself up, you can still kind of force him off that angle. So Soldier is just insane right now. I can't imagine that he's not going to get nerfed. He's really, really strong. Like I said, for the highest tiers of play, I don't think that he's necessarily stronger than these three, but if we think about if we just think about all the tiers combined, I think Soldier is just like the character to play right now. You're gonna see him every game, and you probably should be playing him if you don't know what else to play. Next up, let's talk about Hanzo. Hanzo's really strong. He's still super strong. I think that he does have a little bit of a consistency problem where there's some compositions you can't play him in. Like, he has kind of the opposite problem of Sojourn, where I do think, like, in poke compositions, and maybe in poke compositions he's way better. In brawl compositions, I think he's a little bit better, but you just can't play him in dive. Like, you're not going to play Hanzo in dive. He also doesn't really play against dive very well. So, like, there's, like, worse matchups for him. He's less flexible. Still think he's really, really strong in the right matchups. He's just not going to be good on every single comp. I'm going to put him in A tier. I think he's going to be a bit hard of a character to one trick, just in general. That's always been true for Hanzo, but he's an amazing character when he's good. And there's most of the time in ranked, if you're good enough on Hanzo, you can just get picks and find value. I don't know why Hammond's here. You're sneaking in, but let's talk about Symmetra, where Symmetra just kind of came out of nowhere and is just insane right now. Super, super strong, really doing a lot. And I think that while she's weaker for sure in most ranks, she's definitely weaker. You don't get free turret value, or mainly in like the lowest tiers of play, she's not going to get as much value. she is a lot stronger if we think about how impactful she is right now in the highest tiers of play, or with people that really learn Symmetra. I would say like maybe Diamond and above, she's actually just a net positive, and she's actually really strong. And she was already pretty strong before. I think I put her in the B tier before for most ranks, and I put her in the S tier for the metal ranks. I would probably lower her down to the B tier for the metal ranks, and then up to A for, you know, most ranks and high ranks of play, because she's just really strong right now. I think that you can't really play her that well into a dive, or with the dive I mean, but you can play her really well into a brawl, and you can actually make her work into a lot of poke comps, and with a lot of poke comps as well. I'm actually going to put her in the A. I think that she's really strong right now. Just kind of a sleeper pick this meta. Next up, let's talk about Pharah. Pharah's going to be pretty map centric as far as where she's going to get her value. I think that she can just completely take over a game if you have that mercy pocket on the right map, but it's also going to be dependent on how good you are at this character, how good your mercy is at being disciplined with her flight, and how good the enemy DPS hit scan is. So there's like a combination there. It's also, is the enemy tank player willing and able to swap to a good diva? So like there's a lot of factors where I feel like it's slightly out of your control. Like you can control your own skill set, but you can't control how focused you're going to be. You can't control if the game is just going to be an auto win because they don't pass the skill threshold to stop you, or the flexible hero pool to stop you. So that's like both a pro and a con, because sometimes you just get free wins, but then sometimes you get heavily just completely shut down. Overall, I do think I'm going to put Pharah in the top of B tier. You know, very linear in the conditions that you can play her in, but when you can play her, she just dominates, takes over a lobby. Next up, let's talk about Genji. Genji is actually fine. I think that if you're playing a legitimate dive comp, Genji is actually good. If you're playing, I don't know, Hammond, Diva, Winston, Doom, and you have a Tracer and you're going in, or maybe you have a Far Mercy, whatever, Genji can be legitimately good. But if you're trying to play Genji in or against a brawl or with a poke, I think he's just like pretty mediocre at best. I think that there are situations where he can definitely abuse characters like Ashe and Hanzo and even Cassidy, but there are other characters that he just doesn't really want to deal with at all, like Mei and Flyers and Sim and Symmetra and Sombra, and Symmetra and Sombra, and yeah, it could be a mess. Even Echo is kind of annoying. I'm gonna say like he's fine. I'm gonna say he's like a solid B tier character. He can be fine in the right situation, but you know, it's a little bit strange. Next up, let's talk about Echo, and I do think that Echo is actually really good. I would say that Echo is most likely an upper A character, really strong. I'm gonna say that Echo is probably in between Cass and Mei. She doesn't need a pocket to be good. Really, right now, she is going to be kind of held a little hostage by Ashes and Soldiers. Unfortunately, good Tracers as well. But if you're disciplined with this character, you can get a lot of value and just completely deadlift games. She's super strong. She gets even better with the pocket, of course, but it's not needed like Pharah is. And I think she's a lot more versatile, where if you're being heavily countered when you fly in open space, you can just play disciplined corners, use your flight oftentimes as like a get out, and you're just holding an aggressive angle. All in all, I think that she's really strong, and I'm putting her definitely in the mid-A. And yeah, this is where I have my DPS tier list right now. And you might be like, what the heck? There's a lot of characters in S or A, but the reality of it is all these characters are really strong. It's strange because in the past, I feel like there have been a lot worse of characters, but right now I can see a reason to play a lot of these characters, and especially like this chunk at the top. Like all these characters are viable in different compositions for different reasons. I would say that these are the objectively strongest ones that are kind of enforcing their power, or they're very versatile. But I think any of these characters would be reasonable as long as you're playing them in the right team compositions with the right other pairings, or if you're not playing against your counters or anything like that. But definitely let me know if there's any character on this list that you think I've overrated or underrated in the comments down below. Let me know what heroes that you're gonna main as a DPS this season. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.